Hi, I'm Mike Thornton from Production Expert, and in the first video of this series, we looked at how music streaming is changing the way we deliver music to the consumer and how we need to change the way we mix and master because streaming services are now using loudness normalization. Using compression techniques to try and make my CD louder than your CD have meant that we've tended to lose dynamic range in our mixes and masters. Here is a track that's been mixed and ready for mastering. Notice it doesn't go all the way up to 0 dB. There is some headroom, some space to play with. Next up is the same track, but this time it's been normalized to just under digital headroom. Of course, it's a simple gain change to bring the overall level of the track up, so at the loudest point it doesn't quite hit digital headroom. And this simple gain change process increases the perceived loudness by 4.5 loudness units, with one loudness unit, 1 LU, equivalent to 1 dB. Now this was how the early CDs were mastered, but with the start of the loudness wars, this just wasn't considered to be enough. At first, subtle compression techniques were employed to gently increase the perceived volume without increasing the peak level. Watch as I overlay a version of the same track, this time with subtle peak limiting using the ISL2 from Nugen audio. See how the lower level content is a little bit louder, but of course the peaks don't get any higher. This subtle limiting increases the loudness by a further 2 LU. But remember, this is dynamics compression. The peak level has not been increased. It can't because we're already at digital headroom. We've hit that ceiling and we can't go any higher. So the only way we can make this track sound louder is with audio compression techniques, which compromises the dynamic range, the light and shade, and will inevitably reduce the life of a track. As the loudness wars increased, so did the amount of compression, and the dynamic range continued to drop as the life was squashed out of the music. Here is a very heavily compressed version of the same track, and see how the quieter parts are so much louder. And this version is another 5 LU louder than the gently processed version. Now that more and more music streaming services are normalizing to an average loudness figure, rather than normalizing up to a peak level as close to digital headroom as possible, with average loudness normalization, there is no point in using compression techniques to make a track sound louder, because when normalizing to loudness, watch what happens to our heavily compressed track. It simply gets turned down, so the average loudness matches the target loudness. Notice how the peaks are now nowhere near digital headroom. So now what we have is a quieter but still heavily compressed track with loads of wasted headroom. The better thing to do is to use that lightly processed track, which actually hardly needs any adjustment to match the -16 LKFS target that a lot of music streaming services are now using. Nugen Audio have a range of tools which they've designed to help music producers, mix and mastering engineers prepare content for music delivery services that normalize to loudness. Firstly, we're going to look at Master Check. This plugin is divided into two sections with the numeric displays at the top and the meters at the bottom. Looking at the meters, firstly we have a loudness meter which measures loudness using a worldwide standard that's been developed to produce a meter that responds like our ears to perceived loudness. This meter actually displays the average loudness over the last 3 seconds. And then the loudness number up here displays the average loudness since you last hit the reset button. So in normal operation, that would be the average loudness for the whole track up to that point. The best practice is to mix your tracks to be around -16 LKFS so that the music streaming services do not have to turn up or turn down to normalize your tracks to their preferred target loudness, which is usually around -16. Next, we have a meter which displays the peak to loudness ratio, and in effect this displays the amount of dynamic range or how much audio compression there is on a track. And notice how the colour changes from green for good, through amber for OK, to red warning that you're probably overdoing the processing. The meter displays the short-term peak to loudness, whereas the numeric display up here displays the peak to loudness ratio using the average loudness since the last time you pressed the reset button. Finally, in the meter section, there is a true peak meter to make sure that you're not going over digital headroom. And we'll be looking at this and true peak in more detail in the third video in this series. So hopefully you can see why there is no longer any point in chasing the loudness wars, because with more and more services normalizing to an average loudness rather than up to a peak level, it is so much more beneficial to have a mix with light and shade and life to it. In the last video in this series, we're going to show how using a true peak limiter like the Nugen Audio ISL2 is going to help you get the best out of your mix without getting distortion.